Welcome to Klein's Geometry. Today we're going to talk about conditional statements. This is from lesson 2-2. Conditional statements are anything written in the form if something, then something else is going to happen. You've probably heard, if you don't clean your room, then you aren't going out tonight. That's a conditional statement. Parents use them all the time. The part that comes after if is the hypothesis of the statement, and the part that comes after then is what we call the conclusion. And you might have heard mind your P's and Q's. When we abbreviate a conditional statement, we call it P. The hypothesis implies the conclusion. P implies Q. So you'll see this notation sometimes, and that's what it means. If you don't clean your room, then you aren't going out tonight. If I don't buy groceries, then we won't have dinner. If the dog sees the cat, then he bites him. All conditional statements. We give a condition, we tell what the conclusion will be. So sometimes you'll get another statement, and you might be asked to write a conditional statement. And the statement you get will just be a sentence, such as 16-year-olds may apply for a driver's license. Now, to write it as a conditional statement, I know I'm going to need an if, and I'm going to need a then. And I'm going to need some stuff in here, the hypothesis and the conclusion. So I look at what I'm given, and I find the subject of it. And here's the subject of it, 16-year-olds. So if, and for my hypothesis, I might put a person is 16. Then, and now I just look for the predicate. What could I conclude if they were 16? And that's what goes after then. Then, they may apply for a driver's license. So that's all you have to do, if you're writing a conditional statement, is you find your subject and you put it in the form of a hypothesis. If a person is 16, you find your predicate. What happens then? Then they may apply for a driver's license. And you always keep the words if and then in there, okay? In that order. If, then. Now, conditionals, we can look at it a lot of different ways. I'm sure you've had discussions with people who've kind of dazzled you with the way they've thrown in the words not and if and all that sort of thing. So let's start with a conditional. If the measure of angle A equals 95 degrees, then angle A is obtuse. Okay, so there's a conditional statement. And what we have there is P, the hypothesis, implies Q, the conclusion. Now, nobody says it has to be in that order. Let's see what happens here. I could turn it around. That would be the converse. So what I'd do then is I'd still have if, and I'd still have then. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write angle A is obtuse. So if angle A is obtuse, then the measure of angle A equals 95 degrees. So I turned it around. I said Q implies P here. Okay? So sometimes you'll see people trying to kind of mess with your mind a little bit by just turning a statement around, and they're going to think they're going to lead you to believe that that's true both ways. Well, let's look at this. Let's say we've got an angle, it's 95 degrees. We can conclude that is an obtuse angle. That would be its truth value. I've got something. Can I make that conclusion? Yes, I can. It's true. Okay? Now, what if I told you angle A is obtuse? Can we conclude it has to be 95 degrees? Absolutely not. It could be 90 degrees, 105 degrees, 125 degrees. It could be any measure between 90 and 180 and be obtuse. So when people turn things around on you like this, they've changed the truth value of it. Now an inverse is just like our conditional. We've got, but we're going to negate it. So here I've got if the measure of angle A. So this time, since it's an inverse, I'm going to say not P implies not Q. And what that means is I'm going to say the opposite of this. So instead of the measure of A equals 95, I'm going to say if the measure of angle A, does not equal 95 degrees, then, and I'll say the measure of angle A is not obtuse. So notice I negated this and I negated this. So not P, and that little tilde sign means not, implies not Q. That's the inverse. Now I'm saying the measure of angle A is not 95. Can we conclude that it's not obtuse? Well, not really. Again, it could be 100, and then it would be obtuse. So this is also false. So things to remember, the verses, notice they have the same truth value. They might both be true, they might both be false, but they'll both be the same truth value. Now when you think about the contrapositive, that switches everything around. Instead of P implies Q, I'm going to have the Q and the P turned around like the converse, but I'm also going to add the not. So not Q implies not P is the contrapositive of the statement. So here, I'll start over here, if the measure of, or if angle A, not the measure, if angle A is not obtuse, then the measure of angle A is not 95 degrees. Now, notice the contrapositive, well, if it's not obtuse, it couldn't possibly be 95 degrees. So that's a true statement. And what we see is the conditional and the contrapositive, so the conditional here and the contrapositive, they will always have the same truth value. They'll always be the same. The two big words, conditional, contrapositive, always the same truth value. The verses, converse and inverse, always the same truth value. Sometimes they'll all be true, they'll all be false. Maybe these two, the conditional and the contrapositive, will be true, and these two verses will be false. Maybe the verses will be true, the conditional and contrapositive will be false, but this relationship will always hold. Converse and inverse, same. Conditional, contrapositive, same. And I like that because once we start putting knots in there, I sometimes get confused. So it's easier to just say, figure out what the conditional is. If it's true, so is the contrapositive. You don't have to think about it. Figure out what the converse is. If it's false, so is the inverse. You don't even have to think about it. So conditionals, P implies Q. If P, then Q. Converse, Q implies P. If Q, then P. Inverse, not P implies not Q. Same order as the conditional, different truth value. And contrapositive, not Q implies not P. Think of it as the converse of the inverse. Turned it around, added not. So today's assignment is going to seem like writing an English paper to you. You're going to be writing a lot of sentences, but enjoy, and we'll keep those straight. Have a good day.